What's good? Welcome back. This is Brittany with SeedSoilWater, and we are breaking the habit of being ourselves, learning how to at least. Right now, we are in the section about overcoming your body. And last video, we went over epigenetics, and we're going to jump back in. Perpetuating old states of being sets us up for an undesirable genetic destiny. Perpetuating old states of being, so pretty much the habit of being ourself, will set us up for an undesirable genetic destiny, which means that we actually have some input there. Just as certain areas of the brain are hardwired, whereas other areas are more plastic, which means they're able to be changed by learning and by experience, I believe genes are the same way. And this is Dr. Joe Dispenza speaking, who I would definitely say has some proof in his pudding in terms of him being able to speak to this. There are certain parts of our genetics that are more easily turned on, while other genetic sequences are somewhat more hardwired, which means they are harder to activate because they have been around longer in our genetic history. At least that's what science says right now. And we all know science does evolve. How do we keep certain genes turned on and others turned off? Yes. If we stay in the same toxic state of anger, the same melancholy state of depression, the same vigilant state of anxiety, or the same low state of unworthiness, those redundant chemical signals we have talked about keep pushing the same genetic buttons, which ultimately cause the activation of certain diseases. What? Let's talk about that again. So, toxic states of being, whether it be anger, depression, anxiety, unworthiness, those are all what they all actually resonate at a low frequency. It's actually measurable, and they are low vibe states of being. And it doesn't mean that you're expected to never experience those things. In fact, you must in order to evolve and to go through things, but it's about not remaining there the majority of the time until it becomes who you are. Those redundant chemical signals keep pushing the same genetic buttons, which ultimately cause the activation of certain diseases. That's why they say stress kills. Stressful emotions, as you will learn, actually pull the genetic trigger, dysregulating the cells. Dysregulation refers to impairment of a physiological regulatory mechanism and creating disease. So when the cells are dysregulated by constant stress, it in turn creates disease. And that's why learning how to take every thought captive and get a hold of your mind is indeed one of the most beneficial investments that you could ever make in yourself. And it's also extremely challenging, especially if it's never been modeled for you and you have learned the script, the narrative of stress, hopelessness, despair, not enoughness, you don't deserve it, unworthiness, those kinds of BS things. So, when we think and feel in the same ways for most of our lives and memorize familiar states of being, our internal chemical state keeps activating the same genes, meaning that we keep making the same proteins. But the body cannot adapt to these repeated demands and it begins to break down. It's interesting. If we do that for 10 or 20 years, the genes begin to wear out and they start making cheaper proteins. What do I mean? Think about what happens when we age. Our skin sags because its collagen and elastin come to be made of cheaper proteins. What happens to our muscles? They atrophy. Well, no surprise there. Actin and myosin, too, are proteins. Okay, so the point is that proteins are needed. They're really in high demand. Here's an analogy. When a metal part for your car is manufactured, it is produced in a die or a mold. Each time the mold or die is used, it is subjected to certain forces, including heat and friction, which begin to wear it down. As you might guess, car parts are built to very close tolerances, referring to the permitted variation in a workpiece's dimensions. So it's like pretty darn exact. Over time, that die or mold wears to the point that it produces parts that won't fit properly to other parts because it gets like warped, right? This is similar to what happens to the body. As a result of stress or a habit of being repeatedly and consistently angry, fearful, sad, and so on, the DNA that the peptides use to produce proteins will start to malfunction. Does that not remind you of like the story of anxiety? And then the spin out of anxiety ends up happening just because the body cannot keep up, and it becomes warped, and it becomes out of touch with what really is a big deal and what's just feeling like a really big deal. And it tries to keep up in order, and by just sending out the same message, like, crap's getting real, hurry and respond, make this better, you know? And okay, let's keep going. What is the genetic impact if we stay in routine, familiar conditions, creating the same emotional reactions by doing the same things, thinking the same thoughts, seeing the same people, and memorizing our lives into a predictable pattern? We are now headed for an undesirable genetic destiny. We are locked into the same patterns as generations before us, which confronted the same or similar situations. And if we are only reliving our emotional memories of the past, then we are headed for a predictable outcome or predictable end. Same thing. Our bodies will begin to create the same genetic conditions that previous generations have faced. So isn't that interesting? It's like the disease that we thought that we were told is genetic. It's like, well, yeah, it's probably a genetic learned behavior, but it's not, you're not necessarily destined for it because somebody in your family had it. Thus, the body will stay the same as long as we are feeling the same way day in and day out. And if science tells us that it is the environment that signals the genes involved in evolution, what if our environment never changes? What if we've memorized the same conditions in our outer world and we're living by the same thoughts, behaviors, and feelings? What if everything in our lives stays the same? You just learned that the external environment chemically signals genes through the emotions of an experience. So if the experiences in your life aren't changing, the chemical signals going to your genes aren't changing. No new information from the outer world is reaching your cells. Once again, this is why I created Seed, Soil, Water, Spa. And there are a lot of videos on there, so go check out what's on there, and I'll be continuing to add more. I actually have an exciting new She Shall Rise series that's going to be added and coming soon. It's in the works. Stay tuned. Go subscribe. Seed, Soil, Water, Spa. But this whole statement right here, if you are just thinking your own thoughts, like, also just from a space of humility, how arrogant is it for us to just think, to just never allow new, like, an external thought to be brought in? It's like, no, I know everything. Like, I'm going to stick with my thoughts and I don't want any other thoughts. Some of us were raised in households like that, and we repent, don't we? And we change. But anyway, so the whole point of Seed, Soil, Water, Spa is to allow other thoughts, other experiences to enter into your imagination that maybe you would have never even thought of before, and to start experiencing that on the outside and, well, on the inside, which will then magnetize on the outside. The quantum model, jumping back in, the quantum model asserts that we can signal the body emotionally and begin to alter a chain of genetic events without first having any actual physical experience that correlates to that emotion. I'm gonna say it again for those in the back. Listen to this. The quantum model asserts, it says that we can signal the body emotionally and begin to alter a chain of genetic events without first having any actual physical experience that correlates to that emotion. That means when you go to Seed, Soil, Water, Spa and you listen to those visualizations and you enter into the moment of creative imagination, you can, and you conjure up the feelings of what it actually feels like. Maybe it's the utter relief of just complete, it is finished, like, more than enough here now. You know, whatever that means to you, if it's money, if it's time, if it's both. And or the happiness of, like, oh my gosh, I know who I am now, and I've discovered my divine purpose, and I'm living in my divine purpose. Whatever it is for you, by attuning yourself to that experience, and especially if you do it more than once, and especially when you learn to then partner that up with some meditative type techniques, like physical techniques, then you can magnetize to that experience before it's even arranged in the physical. And the observer effect that we've already gone over actually would suggest that you doing this actually sends out the signal telling the electrons how to line up, how to be, how to grow, how to form the physical world. And because they are forming the physical world out of perceived nothingness, because the particles are so quantum level, so tiny that we can't see them, but it will indeed begin lining up things for you. The path lays out before you as you visualize what it would mean to you. And remember, okay, so now I'm going to speak to the ones who were raised up, like in religion or in church. The scripture says that he desires to give us he longs to give us the desires of our hearts. So, of course, the thing is, we want to be attuned to righteousness because we don't want to utilize our powers for evil, right? But also, don't be so afraid to dream a little. Like, if he says it's finished and it is done and everything is paid in full to Telestai, there's a reason they didn't want to put that in English in the word, because they're like, we don't really want them to actually know that it's all paid in full, because if it's really paid in full, like, what would you choose? If it's really exceedingly and abundantly far above, far more than anything you could ask, think, dream, or imagine, what would you choose? And it's ironically difficult for those of us who have been in slave survival mode for so long. It is ironically difficult to actually make your selection of what you want. And so start writing that down. Start deciding who do you want to be? Who would you desire to be? Who would you love to be if you could be your dream version of yourself? What would that look like? What would the relationships around you feel like? What would they entail? How would you spend your time? What would you not worry about anymore? And then start magnetizing to that and step into it in faith currency, and allow it to surround you and embody, like surround you, like a wall of fire. Okay. Also, that's what it was. Patreon. I just yesterday, I've had Patreon set up for ages. I've never really used it. I didn't even have a membership set up on there because I didn't really have any reason for it. I just yesterday got a download because I got this message yesterday, and I was like, where do I take it? Do I post it on Instagram? Do I post it on YouTube? And it didn't feel appropriate for either of those platforms. It felt like more for like the real ones. And there needs to be some sort of a way of negotiating, or like opting into being one of those real ones, in terms of like, this matters to you. And it's anyway, so I just felt the nudge to fire up Patreon. It's like a $2.22, I think, currently, monthly thing, and the 90% of that very small monthly amount will go to support SeedSoilWater Foundation, which partners with the Path of Bliss Football Academy in Ghana, as well as She Shall Rise, and the projects that are there supporting women entrepreneurs, as well as whatever the myriad of things that whatever the lifestyle is, it's not limited, but just to women who have overcome things in life. And so if you are somebody who wants, when I get those random downloads that are spiritually relevant, and you feel, and that's the other thing, I was very much on the fly. It was not rehearsed. I didn't look, like anything. I just looked like my normal, I just worked out self. That's pretty much my standard. And but I felt the nudge to download this video. So anyway, it's an audio and it's on there right now, Patreon. And it's the one that says like this one message, something like that. So go check it out. Thank you for the support in advance. Just know that it is going to a good place. There's only 10% that will be utilized for administrative whatevers. And but everything, I mean, the whole thing, my whole life is in purpose. So I hope that you believe that by now, based on what I sit here and do with my free time. Okay, let's keep going. So, the quantum model asserts that we can signal the body emotionally and begin to alter a chain of genetic events without first having any actual physical experience that correlates to that emotion. So this, he's talking very specifically like within the body, but I also want to say like the next step is actually like everything is energy, because in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word spoke. So the essence of this of the creator spoke everything into being with his voice, which we know sound is waves. We know that waves actually break down to particles. The particles are the electron particles can be either a wave or a particle at any given time. The way that they decide to line up is when a conscious being directs them with and observes them and tells them which way to go, and then they respond, and all of creation is awaiting for the revelation of us to get this okay? So we don't need to win the race, the lottery, or the promotion before we experience the emotions of those events. Remember, we can create emotion by thought alone. We can create an emotion by thought alone. My 10-day, like that's, I don't know if you've heard it yet, but that's my 10-day thing where I'm like, I look forward to a trip, I'm like 10 more days, and I can conjure up that excitement and that joy within me, because it's like, yes, 10 days. Like I used to, before the thing, I took a lot of trips, and before kids, anyway, in 2017, I think I traveled like every 3 weeks to different places. And so it was just this like 10 more days, till my next trip. And it was something I just got so excited because it's like paid for by then. It's definitely happening. I know kind of what I have a good idea what the weather's going to be like, what it's going to, how the experience is going to go. So that's one of those examples where I can just tap into that excitement and joy. So find whatever your thing is. My friend said it was when he got his puppy, and he can like tap into that. So anyway, I guess he's a better person than I am. But the 10-day to a trip, I guess I just love a good trip. Okay, so remember, we can create an emotion by thought alone. We can experience joy or gratitude ahead of the environment, to such an extent that the body begins to believe that it is already in that event. As a result, we can signal our genes to make new proteins to change our bodies to be ahead of the present environment. And once we can figure out how to apply this so that we stop the stress release, then we're spending less time living doused in stress chemicals, and we're spending more times envisioning the future and being excited about things and sending out currencies of faith and picking what we want and just trusting that it is so, and knowing that all things are working together for good. So I'm going to leave this one here and pick up on the next one. Be blessed, be well, be free.